It's been announced that George Orwell's 1984 is being developed as a 5-part TV series that reflects the issues of today. Not everybody is happy about this. On 12th of January 2021, Deadline published an exclusive story headlined 1984 Heads to TV as Wiip, I hope I pronounced that right, adapts the shocking stage show based on George Orwell's iconic novel. Wow, they really like the SEO at Deadline, don't they? The book of 1984, published in 1949, has just gone out of copyright, and there hasn't been a screen version of it since the year 1984, when Michael Radford made a film of it with John Hurt as Winston Smith, Richard Burton as O'Brien, and Susanna Hamilton as Julia. The talk now is of a 5-part TV serial based on the stage version by Robert Icke and Duncan Macmillan. Now, originally, this play launched in Nottingham in 2013. I saw it in the West End of London a couple of years later, I think, and it's a very powerful play, especially the torture scenes. And when 2017 came around, and Donald Trump had just been elected President of the United States, a version opened on Broadway to great acclaim, although it wasn't to everybody's taste. Like I say, it's very shocking, and it was reported that Jennifer Lawrence, the movie star, was in the audience and had to rush out to the toilet at one point to puke.
When we all read it in 8th grade, it was science fiction, and now it's actually documentary. It's unbelievable to think how prescient George Orwell was.
So let's put some flesh on the bones here. Deadline reports that former ABC chief Paul Lee's independent studio, Wiip, has optioned the rights to the play. But here's the really interesting part. Icke and Macmillan said it would be a, quote, bold new version, unquote, of Orwell's story in a world that has developed a dangerous addiction to disinformation. In the statement, they added, as the world grapples with democracy and government in our divided age of surveillance, fake news and truth decay, the urgency of Orwell's masterpiece is undeniable. The small screen feels like a natural home for his portrait of a society in which people trust their screens more than the world outside their windows. I posted this story on the Orwell Society's private Facebook page, and the immediate reaction from one of the members was, I'll believe it when I see it. It's an understandable reaction because these adaptations of 1984 keep being trapped in development hell. Since about 2014, there's been talk of a feature film directed by Paul Greengrass and written by James Graham, and that seems to have come to nothing. Again, this is a quote from Deadline, from James Graham, in fact. Paul and I got very excited about it, and then we realised it's a difficult project. The book is just so bloody perfect, we started going, let's just pause for a second. The world of surveillance and tech moves on so quickly, we just needed to have a broader view of it. But you know what? If this 5-part TV series does see the light of day, I'm just wondering if it's going to annoy half the potential audience, or at least those Orwell admirers with a more conservative frame of mind. There are 7 below-the-line comments on the Deadline story, all of them critical. Of course, I don't know how typical that is, but let's just look at the top comment. When they decided not to go forward with their project to recreate 1984, Greengrass and Graham likely concluded they couldn't make an adaptation true to Orwell's book without offering an indictment of the modern ingsoc, i.e. tech oligarchs and the left, which is why Icke and Macmillan said their new creation would be a bold new version of Orwell's story in a world that has developed a dangerous addiction to disinformation. In other words, they intend to subvert Orwell's story to tell their new truth in keeping with party orthodoxy. Orwell himself could not have dreamed up a more perfect irony. It's worth pointing out that the stage play is scrupulously faithful to Orwell's vision, it's extremely thoughtful, and it doesn't bang the drum for one side of politics or the other. You might also say to me, why are you quoting and not random anonymous people off the internet? They're fringe, they don't represent the ordinary viewer. But when I read the comments on some of my Orwell-related videos, The cultural divide is right there in front of me. On the one side, you've got those who think Trump is a right-wing demagogue. And on the other, you've got people who either feel an affinity for him or at least feel uneasy about the relentless march of the progressive worldview, or what his advocates would call progressive. It's worth pausing at this point to talk about George Orwell's politics, which is a huge subject, and he was a man of many contradictions, so whatever I say, or whatever I or anybody else says, is up for debate. In 1983, Orwell's friend Malcolm Muggeridge said this about him.
That really the great success of George has been that he has leftish credentials and takes a rightist view.
It's also true that he could be very critical of his own side. That was part of his shtick, his refreshing honesty. And he could write sentences like, "So much of left-wing thought is a kind of playing with fire by people who don't even know that fire is hot." On the other hand, from the time he went off to fight fascism in the Spanish Civil War, he identified very firmly as a socialist up until his death in 1950. The line that always comes up in this regard comes from his 1946 essay, Why I Write, and it's this: "Every line of serious work that I have written since 1936 has been written directly or indirectly against totalitarianism and for democratic socialism as I understand it." Now, the fact that Orwell wasn't a slavish party hack is part of what makes him such a fascinating character. He was staunchly patriotic, he was anti-communist, definitely anti-Stalinist. He didn't like the way the Soviet Union had turned out, that's for sure. And in the mid-1940s, when he wrote his novel Animal Farm as a satire on the Russian Revolution, he put a lot of left-wingers' noses out of joint. Then he wrote 1984 and made the villains Ingsoc, English socialism. And as I said in my interview with the Criterion Collection, which is on their 1984 DVD, he's such a fair-minded guy that he makes his own side the bad guys. And in effect, he's saying, look, our lot can go off the deep end as well, you know? We know that the right can do it. We've seen fascism, but the left can be just as bad. So getting back to this mini-series, I can't judge it before I've seen it, but the question that occurs to me is, at what point does an adaptation go against the spirit of what he wrote? This isn't a new question, far from it. In the earliest days of Orwell adaptations, in the 1950s, when his work was being used as anti-Soviet propaganda, the CIA funded a feature-length cartoon of Animal Farm, and they changed the ending.
To the animals, it now seemed that their world, which may or may not someday become a happy place to live in, was worse than ever for ordinary creatures. And another moment had come when they must do something about it.
Money from the American government also went into the 1956 movie of 1984, which wasn't as obviously preachy, but they did shoot two different endings, two alternative endings. More recently, Andy Serkis has been putting together a performance capture version of Animal Farm. This has been picked up by Netflix, but there's no sign of it. It hasn't been made yet. But in an interview in 2017, Serkis said, "Boy, there couldn't be a better time to make Animal Farm," which suggests that, it's not purely going to be about the Russian Revolution. On the broad question of can you adapt Orwell's fiction and give it a contemporary slant while keeping to the spirit of what he wrote, well, I think that's possible, and I say that with the stage versions of Animal Farm in mind. This is a play that's been done in various forms all over the world because you're never going to be short of corrupt governments to satirise. For instance, in 2009, a theatre group in Jenin on the West Bank staged a version that was scathing of the Palestinian Authority. And the guy who ran the group, the artistic director, he was quite outspoken about a lot of things. 2 years later, he was ambushed in his car and shot dead by gunmen.
أكيد لكل مسرحية في فكرة لازم توصل، وإحنا فكرتنا إنه إشي مصغر عن مجتمعنا. هذا إشي مصغر، المسرحية كانت إشي مصغر عن مجتمعنا، الواقع اللي بصير معنا، إنه الخنازير سيطروا على المزرعة، وما كانش يعني في جونز وبلا جونز كان نفس الإشي، يعني ما فرقتش معنا يعني.
Meanwhile, in South Africa, a touring company made up of black women has been making fun of the ANC since 2014.
Essentially, the story is about power and how power can corrupt a human being or a society. So, and as we've seen the world evolve and change, and you know, from pre-colonial to colonial times, post-colonialism, and this modern capitalist society we live in, and with every society that we see that has had to overcome certain power structures of oppression, like apartheid or civil rights movement or whatever it might be, we find that in those countries, the people who then take over the power after those who were oppressing them end up actually resembling the same people they were fighting against. So essentially, it stops being about people and about power. And I think that's why this play is so relevant.
The point I'm inching towards is that, yes, you can use Orwell to make points about the modern political scene. If you do it with a sledgehammer, you run the risk of alienating half your potential audience, but it's early days. We can't be sure this project will even come to fruition. And if it does, well, that's the time we can all form an opinion on it.
Well, like one of the key points of our play is the idea that 2 + 2 could equal 5, if somebody persuades you that it does.
Well, that's it from me. I wasn't planning to do an Orwell-related video this week, but this story came up and I thought I would. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please do, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye-bye.